So today we're going to be talking about a case which I thought was really, really well known. Everybody sort of knew about it, but apparently they don't. And that is the case of child pageant queen JonBenet Ramsey. So as I've just said, JonBenet was a child pageant queen from Colorado in the USA, and she was only 6 years old when she was murdered on Christmas Day of 1996. This case remains unsolved to this day. So JonBenet was the daughter of Patsy and John. Slightly confusing, so I'm going to call JonBenet JonBenet and her dad John. Anyway, according to JonBenet's mother Patsy, they initially reported JonBenet as missing after Patsy found a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note on the kitchen staircase of the family home. The note claimed to be written by a foreign group and demanded $118,000 in ransom for the safe return of JonBenet. The note also gave very specific instructions not to call the police and not to call any friends. It also stated that they would collect the money between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. the following day. So the first very suspicious thing about this note is the very oddly specific amount of money that they asked for. So on the surface, $118,000 seems like a completely random amount, until John, the father, said that that was the exact amount of his Christmas bonus that he had received earlier that month. So this obviously led John and authorities to assume that this note was left by somebody who had access to this information. The police initially looked into all of his colleagues, but no leads were found. They also looked into the possibility that this amount was in reference to Psalm 118 from the Bible. They consulted a lot of authority figures in religion, but again, no leads, no relevance was found. The FBI also said that this note was unusually long, and the police believed that it was actually staged. The only fingerprints found on this note belonged to Patsy herself. The note and a draft of the note were written with paper and pen that actually belonged to the household. The paper and pen were then returned to where they were found instead of being left out with the note. Now, authorities copied out the note to see roughly how long it would take, and it took them 21 minutes to write out this note. So, that would mean that the kidnappers had written out the note twice for the draft. So that's about 42 minutes already. They would have had to think of what to say, they would have had to find the paper and the pen, and then put it back. So they would have been there for well over an hour, and nobody heard them or saw them? Seems a bit odd. There is also the fact that many lines of this note were actually quotes from films such as Speed and Dirty Harry and other films of that type. The note also had an unusual use of exclamation marks, and it contained misspellings and grammatical errors that police believed were actually false and done on purpose to make it look like it was written by somebody who was not a native speaker. The Orlando Bureau of Investigation said that there was a lot of evidence that this note was written by Patsy, and a forensic pathologist called Michael Baden said that in his 60 years of experience he had never seen a note like this, and that he believed it was not written by a stranger. However, a federal court did rule it highly unlikely that this was written by Patsy, citing 6 different certified handwriting experts. The handwriting just didn't match up. But I mean, if you're going to stage a note, you're going to change your handwriting, aren't you? Like, isn't that obvious? Despite the note's very clear and specific instructions to not phone the police or friends, Patsy phoned the police at 5:23 a.m. She then also called her friends to let them know what was happening. 3 minutes after this call was made, 2 police officers arrived at the house. They began searching for any sign of forced entry, but they didn't find any. They did find a smashed window in the basement. However, John, the father, said that he had actually done that by accident weeks ago, and it was nothing to do with the disappearance. While they were in the basement, one of the police officers came across a door that had a wooden latch on the inside. He immediately ruled this out as an escape route because there was an interior lock. And if that's how the kidnappers had escaped, they would not have been able to relock the door. So a forensic team were then dispatched, and they initially just believed that it was a kidnapping case. They cordoned off JonBenet's bedroom, but failed to cordon off the rest of the house. So the only crime scene was deemed to be JonBenet's bedroom. Everything else in the house was contaminated, and so no evidence could truly be found. When family friends arrived, they even cleaned the kitchen, believing it to be helpful to the family, when in reality they were just destroying evidence. At 8 a.m, a detective was awaiting the call for the kidnappers to try and collect the ransom money. But nobody ever phoned to claim the money, which is just really suspicious. I mean, what's the point? What is the point? At 1 p.m, this same detective told John the father and a family friend to do another search of the house to make sure that nothing was amiss that they had just not noticed before. So they started off in the basement, and John opened the latched door that the detective had actually ignored earlier. There he found JonBenet's body. He carried her body upstairs, which obviously contaminated all of the critical evidence on her body because he had now touched it. The autopsy revealed that JonBenet had been hit in the head and it had caused a skull fracture. She had then been strangled with the nylon wire. There was no evidence of conventional rape, but there was some vaginal injury that made sexual assault quite probable. While there was no semen present, it did appear that her vaginal area had been wiped. So the nylon wire that had been used to strangle JonBenet had a broken paintbrush handle attached to it that they had used to sort of tighten it to strangle her. The bristle end of this broken paintbrush was actually found in a tub that contained Patsy's art supplies. The rest of the paintbrush was never found. The autopsy also revealed that a fruit resembling pineapple had been consumed by JonBenet hours before her death. In the crime scene photographs that had been taken, there was a bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table with a spoon in it. When they tested this bowl, the only fingerprints on there were that of Burke. Now, Burke was the 9-year-old brother of JonBenet. John and Patsy, her mother and father, both said that they could not remember giving JonBenet any pineapple. So, this means that Burke was one of the last people to have contact with JonBenet. It also means that the family lied because they told police that Burke had slept through the entire night until they had woken him up several hours after the police had arrived. However, him giving JonBenet this pineapple implies that he wasn't actually asleep through the entire night. So they're already lying. So every member of the Ramsey family, that's John, Patsy and Burke, gave handwriting, blood and hair samples to the police. John and Patsy were questioned together for 2 hours the day after JonBenet's body was found, and Burke was questioned within a week. It is noted that the parents were very uncooperative with the police and refused to give individual interviews, but they gave many televised appearances. They later stated that the reason that they were uncooperative with the police was because they were scared that the police would focus solely on them and ignore any evidence to the contrary, which would result in the kidnappers not being found. And they might have actually been correct, but we'll look into that later. In 1997, a few months after JonBenet's body had been found, John and Patsy offered a $100,000 reward in a newspaper. They also gave their first separate interviews since the body had been found. In 1998, the police officially announced that Burke was not a suspect and had never been considered a suspect. Burke had been interviewed at least 3 times and had never raised any concerns at all. A child psychologist had reviewed these interviews and said that it appeared that the family had a caring and secure dynamic and that there was no reason for concern here. The parents were still prime suspects at this point. In 2002, a new district attorney was appointed and they took this case from the police. They focused mainly on the intruder theory. In 2003, traces of DNA were recovered from JonBenet's clothes. They belonged to an unidentified male. Every male in the family was ruled out on this evidence. In 2008, the district attorney actually wrote an apology letter to the Ramseys, completely clearing them of any involvement based on this DNA evidence. The police, however, didn't agree with this, as they thought that this DNA was just one tiny piece of evidence that might be unconnected to the actual crime. So in 2009, the police then took this case back from the district attorney, and they were now in charge. In October 2013, unsealed court documents showed that in 1999, a grand jury had actually wanted to file charges against John and Patsy Ramsey, but there was insufficient evidence for an indictment. The charges which they presented involved permitting a child into a dangerous situation and also hindering the prosecution of a person wanted for first-degree murder. In 2016, a show aired on CBS which implied that Burke had actually hit his sister over the head and that his family had covered it up. As a result of this, the producers, cast members, and anybody else who had any involvement in the show was sued on a defamation lawsuit on behalf of Burke. So, now that we've got the main facts of the case out of the way, there are three main theories to do with this case. The first theory is that Patsy had hit JonBenet over the head in a fit of rage after JonBenet had wet the bed. She then assumed that she had killed JonBenet and strangled her. Now, to me, this theory has very little weight. I couldn't find anywhere any evidence that JonBenet had actually wet the bed that night. I mean, with her room being a crime scene, they would have noticed had the bed been wet or had the sheets been removed, but it wasn't noted anywhere that this had happened. It also seems unlikely that you wouldn't make sure that you had actually killed your child before you took such drastic measures as to strangle them. Do you know what I mean? I mean, this theory just doesn't make sense to me. While it does match up with the theory that Patsy wrote the note, that theory also makes sense with the next theory that we're going to talk about. So, the second theory, and the theory which I personally believe, is the theory that Burke had actually hit his sister over the head and the family covered it up. To me, the motive is very clear here. A young child has a younger sister who gets so much attention and money for being a child beauty queen that he is quite jealous. Did they possibly have a fight over the pineapple that she was eating? Had he made the pineapple for himself and she ate it? I mean, to us as adults, that seems just completely ridiculous. But to a 9-year-old who's already jealous of the attention that his sister's getting, that could be enough to just push him over the edge. The parents would obviously then want to protect their child, which would explain why Patsy wrote the note. There have since been experiments conducted to see if this theory holds any weight. They found a flashlight in the Ramsey's kitchen, which they believed could have been the murder weapon used by Burke. So, experimenters used a fake skull with a wig on and a 10-year-old boy and asked him to hit the skull with the flashlight and see if he could inflict the same or similar injuries to that was found on JonBenet's skull. He could. But this isn't as cut and dry as it seems. There is the issue that he had to hit her several times with the flashlight to get similar injuries, which Burke could have hit JonBenet several times. That doesn't rule it out. But this 10-year-old that they used was much bigger than Burke. He had a lot more strength than Burke would have. So it doesn't seem very likely. That doesn't mean that Burke didn't do it though. It means that the flashlight is probably not the weapon. So the final theory is the intruder theory. So on the night that JonBenet was killed, there were 2 windows left slightly open in order to let the Christmas lights, electric wires, into the house. There was also the broken window in the basement that we mentioned, and one of the doors was actually left unlocked. It was originally hypothesized by the police that the broken window in the basement was the entry point, but it was then noted that there was actually a huge spider's web covering that window that was completely undisturbed. If somebody had climbed in through that window, that spider's web would have been non-existent. There was also an unidentified boot print on the basement floor. The police completely ignored this as they wanted to believe that it was the family. Had they actually looked into this as a lead, This case could have been solved by now. So the motive for the intruder theory is by far the most convincing. A child beauty queen who is quite well known is literally a magnet for sexual predators and paedophiles. So in the months leading up to JonBenet's death, there had been over 100 burglaries in her neighbourhood alone. There were also 38 registered sex offenders within a 2-mile radius of her house. So this could mean that it was actually a targeted attack. I still don't think it makes sense though that these kidnappers left a ransom note but didn't actually kidnap JonBenet. She never made it out of the house that night. She was never kidnapped. So, like I said at the beginning, to this day, this case remains unsolved. There has, however, been one confession. In 2006, a 41-year-old elementary school teacher called John Mark Haar, he confessed to drugging, sexually assaulting and killing JonBenet Ramsey. So the police decided to test his DNA against all the DNA that they had found at the crime scene. However, there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime. He also only gave details that were public knowledge at the time. He didn't give any convincing detail. And then the final straw was that there was no drugs in JonBenet's system when the autopsy was performed. So his claim that he drugged her was actually proven to be false. This man had falsely confessed to the murder for some attention. I sincerely hope he's no longer an elementary school teacher because that is messed up. So yeah, that is all of the facts that I could find on the case of JonBenet. Let me know in the comments which theory you think is the most believable. I personally think the brother did it. I don't think he meant to. I think he accidentally, hit her a bit too hard. And then the family all covered it up. But yeah, if you have any suggestions of cases that you think I should do, let me know. I just love learning. And I really hope you enjoyed it. Bye!